All right, so our final speaker this afternoon is Chip Popovich, who's from NEFO6. He's been a long-time supporter of the IPv6 Summit and has talked here on a number of different topics over the past several years. This year we picked a particularly interesting topic on OpenStack and trying to get it run in an IPv6 only type environment. And for those of you who've worked in OpenStack, you know, well, there's a certain amount of IPv6 support, but let's be real, an IP address isn't exactly IPv6 support. So Chip is going to talk a little bit about the fun times that he and NEFO6 and others have had in trying to get OpenStack to be working in an IPv6 only environment. So, Chip?
Thanks, Dan. All right, good afternoon. Thanks for staying around for the session. I know I'm between you and the beer and gear stuff. So it's a tough spot to be in. I hope the session is going to be interesting for you. I think for all intents and purposes, even if you are not into cloud yet, or you are not into OpenStack in particular, this is going to be a telling story about what can happen if you do things without thinking in terms of IPv6. Okay? So this is to reinforce how important it is for all of us to understand V6, to start thinking in terms of V6, and to apply all that to pretty much everything we do in terms of infrastructure. So what we're going to talk about is the IPv6 enablement of OpenStack. My team has been working on this for quite a long time. We are a tiny company, but this is how we started. That was the premise under which we started. We call NEFO6. NEFO stands for cloud in Greek, 6 for V6, obviously. And we really wanted to drive this to the market. And so we invested our time and effort and passion in making this work. So once you go through the pain of making it work, then you're really adamant about making sure that everybody knows what such an enablement really means. So we're going to talk about cloud in general and the implications of IPv6. We're going to talk about OpenStack in particular and our experience of enabling IPv6 for OpenStack and also of taking it to production. It's one thing to do a proof of concept. It's a completely different story to actually put it into production. In terms of an agenda, I'm going to walk you a little bit into this IPv6 and cloud story, sort of a way to connect the dots. Then we're going to talk about IPv6 and OpenStack, so how IPv6 fits into OpenStack. We're going to talk about the case study and then conclude. All right, so a little bit about us, about NEFO6. You know, we are not as big as some of the other companies speaking at the event, so we need to do a bit of mind share. Think of this in terms of this matrix. We have expertise into areas, cloud, and IPv6. And we do offer education, we do offer consulting, and we do have a product on which we work and we are very passionate about. We are a team of very experienced folks. We've been in the industry for a very long time. We have 3 subject matter experts that have been working for Cisco or worked for Cisco for anywhere between 10 and 13 years plus in IPv6, in cloud, data center, video distribution from cloud infrastructures, and so on. So let's talk about cloud and IPv6. And so what I'm going to do in this section, I want to put things in context, right? We are really living very exciting times. In fact, I think I would challenge any one of you to tell me where we're going to land in the next 2 years as far as the infrastructure is concerned. And I think we're going to have a very animate and an exciting conversation because I think it's very difficult to predict. We started this type of slides a long time ago. Okay, so I'm kind of keeping this so you see how we started our story in 2011, so late 2011. And we can now keep on slapping things on top of this. So we are a lot of other things that we can put on top of the slide. But again, just to walk you through the story, our vision when we started was laid out the following way. We see several major inflection points in the industry. we start at the bottom, which is this transition to IPv6, the reason we are all here. And all of us here hopefully believe in this. Not everybody does, but hopefully all of us here believe in it. Sooner or later, a lot of other people will be converted, of course. But the idea is that at this bottom level, what we do is we take all the lessons that we learned from IPv4, we did a few tweaks, both in terms of adding resources to the protocol, adding new capabilities to the protocol, and now really positioning ourselves to innovate a lot more and to scale up the infrastructure a lot more. On top of this, we have the transition to cloud. Now, of course, somebody actually here mentioned that cloud is much more about a way of operating things rather than building an infrastructure, which is very much the case. I think that the whole story has been sold to us as a cost-saving thing. If we really think that, I think we are still drinking the Kool-Aid. The reality is cloud is all about agility. This is not about saving money. You want to take product, you want to take capabilities quickly to the market, use resources like this. And then on top of this, we have this whole new wave of applications, right? Applications now have much shorter life cycles. They come to market very fast in great numbers. Some of them die quickly. They go over a wide range of infrastructures and devices. So it really is it's becoming a significant challenge to manage the delivery of applications through our IT environments. The one thing that I want to comment also about applications is how many of you guys here experience budget decreases in infrastructure, networking? Yep. So what we see with our customers year over year, anywhere all the way up to 10%, which is significant. Everybody thinks that networking can be done easier and cheaper. Of course, until things break, and then everybody realizes that, yes, it is a strategic infrastructure. The challenge I think that we all face is that there is a major disconnect between that top of the pyramid and the rest of the pyramid. The top of the pyramid has direct visibility to the business. Those guys can get budget because they immediately return value to the business. And they care less and less and less about the bottom of the pyramid, about the infrastructure. And that, to a certain extent, is true by design and by architecture. But I think that if we do not constantly keep those two segments talking, that divergence is going to create more and more problems for organizations, for IT organizations. And then finally, so we started with 3 inflection points. In the meantime, we had SDN. We can probably throw in an AV there. We can throw in a bunch of other things. That's why I'm saying it's a very effervescent time for us in infrastructure world. And of course, SDN is about flexibility. But bottom line is you have a scaled up infrastructure. You're a flexible network. You add to that a bunch of automation and orchestration. And now you have an infrastructure that is magical to give you everything you need for applications. The key point that I'm trying to make with this slide, though, is each one of these inflection points is complex in its own right. All these inflection points are actually interdependent. Jeff was talking this morning about IPv6 and SDN. I'm talking about IPv6 and Cloud. There is a lot of discussion about IPv6 and NFV, and so on and so forth. So all of them are interdependent. And more or less, they're kind of coming up at the same time. They are hitting us at the same time. Because what we see is a compression of technology, a timeline as far as technology is concerned, right? I mean, with V6, well, a bunch of us got old on that one. Then we have cloud, which has been going on for 5+ years. And now we have SDN, which is accelerating. So we are kind of hitting a very nice steep function here. So it's a perfect storm. That's kind of the nutshell. All right, so why would we talk about V6 and cloud? Well, there are several reasons for doing this. On one is the practical perspective, and I'll mention this, which is all about, well, aligning transitions. If you align resources for how you plan your cloud transition, you do the same thing for IPv6, you leverage each other, it's much more powerful, much more efficient. Of course, that requires strategic thinking rather than tactical thinking. That requires a less siloed IT organization and an enlightened CIO. That's tough to find sometimes. But then there are the benefits that come with technology, the benefits that come with some of the capabilities that IPv6 has. So I have two sections there. First off, it's addressing. Now, of course, you've heard already about addressing a lot from Tom today, and you already knew about it. I'm not sure how long have you been working on v6. After 2 years, you kind of start to get jaded about the whole v6 addressing discussion. You kind of think, yeah, I know that. But it's very, very powerful resource. It's a resource that changes things dramatically. We know, and Tom explained that a little bit as well this morning, how much you can do with addressing. So it's not just about the fact that now the whole world has more address space and everybody can reach directly, we know unencumbered the services that you offer from cloud. You have enough address space to drive policy and meaning in your bits, in your addresses. But also, I mean, think about it. If you start to use clouds for burst capabilities and so on and so forth, it's much easier if you start to use pre-allocated space, which you can now afford. So you always burst into the same space, policy stays the same, management stays the same, and so on. And then there are a lot of other protocol-specific considerations. Now, take some of these things as some of them being a back-of-the-envelope thought. Frankly, we, Netflix, we've been spending a lot of time just to prop up things as far as OpenStack is concerned. We didn't even get too much into innovation. A lot of these things I'm hoping that all of us here are going to pick up and run with as far as innovation is concerned. I mean, we talk about Slack, can be very powerful in an infrastructure like cloud if combined with the proper orchestration. You can tune NDP in order to manage your resources appropriately, and you can come up with new architectural concepts. I've given this speech a few times, and I mentioned this, and I'm kind of looking to get people going on some of these ideas as well. But in my view, if the people who designed or who built OpenStack would have had IPv6 knowledge when they got started, I'm firmly convinced that we would have been in a completely different place today. Not in terms of just supporting v6, but in terms of actually having better solutions. And my mind always goes to that very simple example. Okay, so you want to do VXLAN and you want to have all these VMs that are popping everywhere in your infrastructure, and then they have to find out to which VXLAN they belong, and then you have to tag that traffic for that VXLAN, and then you want to use tunnels in order to stitch all those all that VM traffic. I think that all that could be done, again, just back of the envelope very easily with IPv6. You give a v6/64 to a VM, that VM already has a multicast group that is unicast based, automatically knows which multicast group to sign up to or to send a request for. With that, automatically you have a registration into the right VXLAN without any type of magic or too much magic. You can use an extension header if you want. You can use a flow label if you want in order to carry your VXLAN labels for policy enforcement. And you can use, I know this is going to be out on a limb, but you can use mobile IPv6 in order to do all the tunneling, right? I mean, we used to have that directly in a stack. We kind of forgot about it. But why use GRE and all these other things when you can do all these things without too much stress? Let's talk a little bit about adoption and trends. Well, we have, of course, the two segments, public cloud and private cloud. And what we can say about public cloud is that it's sadly behind, right? I mean, you still see a lot of the new entrants, a lot of people that are coming and are trying to elbow their way inside of the industry. Those guys know that this is a differentiation. I'm not sure if they really pick up on all the capabilities and value of v6, but they see it as a differentiator. And so you see a lot of IaaS providers come up directly on dual stack. But a lot of the traditional ones, and blatantly Amazon, of course, they're still kind of taking their time. And to me, this is becoming more and more challenging because, like we said, 50% of mobile traffic is over V6 in Verizon network, right? Even higher, right? Where are we now? 60? 65%? At some point, this is going to become user experience problem, right? Because you're going to go to translators and so on and so forth, right? So if you are a cool new startup that comes up with the next social app that is going to make billions of dollars, Amazon is great operationally, but at some point you're going to start to think, well, yeah, but most of my traffic is going to go over V6. Why are we doing translation? Private cloud-wise, well, we still have the stack wars going, but I think OpenStack has kind of leaped forward in that sense. As far as open source is concerned, of course, we still have Azure and other private cloud options. But in terms of open source, OpenStack definitely has been making great headways. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. The idea that here you have a technology that is becoming so widely adopted. It's been named the #1 cloud orchestration for 2014, right? Yet, we are still so far behind as far as V6 support is concerned. So this is just a quick survey statistics that were made that came from a RightScale report. And all I wanted to do is I wanted to list different IaaS providers and put a label on them, right? It's very easy to draw the conclusions. We still have ways to go. And by the way, even for the ones that we say yes, like everything else, when you check the box of IPv6 support, that always comes with caveats, right? So it is a conditional yes at best. It's always good to go through the whole checklist for what is really necessary as far as your deployment is concerned. So user perspective, we have our own product. It's called V6 Sonar. We use it as it's built to do service assurance for cloud services, but it also helps organizations measure user experience over V4 versus V6, right? So it helps with a quantitative approach to transitioning to IPv6. We are a cloud-based service, so it's SaaS offering. Our backend is all in Amazon. Why? Because as a startup for us, it's been pretty nice and easy to bring that up and bring that up operationally, from an operational perspective. But since we do measurements over V4 and V6, we had to have our agents distributed on IaaS providers that support IPv6. So we went hunting for IaaS providers around the world that support IPv6. And so we have 3 qualified. We have another list of others that are qualified. But these are all little names, right? I mean, probably you guys have heard of DigitalOcean, of course. But other than that, not big names. But these guys are hungry. These guys are ready to differentiate themselves. But right now, we're sort of getting to the point where once you, as a startup, you start to figure things out and you have things in place, maybe Amazon, it's something that we can a little bit forget about. If we don't have V6, maybe we forget about it, we forget about our translators, and we move into another infrastructure. So that's a story that I think cloud providers need to start keeping in mind. Let's talk a little bit about IPv6 and OpenStack overview. So to put IPv6 in the context of OpenStack, how many here have worked with OpenStack? Okay, so very few. How many here have heard about OpenStack? All right, that's good. That's better. So OpenStack, it's again open source project. It's basically built by a community, and the primary goal is for it to do automation. So in a nutshell, think of it as being a package of tools, a package of projects, sub-projects, that allows you to actually take whatever resources you need, combine them into a final compute resource that can support whatever needs you have for your application, right? We have a lot of organizations that are playing with OpenStack. Typically, large cloud providers go for OpenStack for cost reasons. But I would suggest to you, if you want to get into this field, do not think that you're going to download OpenStack and from the open source project. You're going to go home, turn it on, and everything is going to be peachy. We have people that contacted us that we worked with who took a month to actually make it work to where they wanted it to work, and some never really got there. So it requires additional work, right? But we do have large deployments. The interesting thing is that finally, some of these large deployments realize that IPv6 is important, right? We came to the market with this message in 2011, which was one of those times when people said, we'll talk about it some other time or later. But now in 2014, it was the first time that we saw demand from very large service providers. We see out there organizations that go, that take into consideration the combination of the two transitions because they want to make sure they future-proof whatever investments they do today. A lot of the greenfield deployments come to v6 world and look for the v6 support in OpenStack because that's a checkbox that they have to tick in order to get their funding and move forward. And then we have the providers that use it, that use v6 as a differentiation. Like I said, we have more and more drivers for some of these cloud infrastructures. The idea is when will providers be ready to extend whatever happens outside of the cloud in terms of v6 and extend it all the way inside of their infrastructure, right? We talked about the mobile traffic, already gave that example. And then earlier today, we talked about IoT, right? So we predicate that IoT will not happen without IPv6. We also predicate that there is going to be a lot of business in cloud in order to manage all the data flow that comes from all these devices. Yet, somehow, we are still hung up on driving that boundary between all these devices and whatever we have in the cloud, right? That's not going to fly for long. So as far as cloud is concerned, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's basically a collection of projects, each one dealing with a particular aspect of this automation and the orchestration. Right, so you have projects like Neutron, which deals with networking part. You have projects like Nova, who deals with compute part. They have Swift and Cinder, who deal with structured and unstructured data and data management, and so on, right? When we went in to start or try to make v6, OpenStack work for v6, we had to obviously choose our projects. So we primarily focused on Neutron, a little bit on Nova. We didn't work too much on Horizon, which is the interface. But what we realized was that there are several things that were fundamentally IPv4, right? So not some things that were conceptually built on IPv4 principles. So things like the way addressing is architected and what expectations the stack has with respect to addressing, what options we have for provisioning, right? That you're only built or developed around DHCP. Control plane implementation. So what type of communication can I use in order to provision my resources? And of course, security, right? I mean, security was very much built around the v4 threats and the v4 threat profiles. What we did with v6 is what we tried to do with v6 and v6 enablement of OpenStack. We tried to make sure that we don't rock the boat too much, right? Because you cannot simply come into this massive OpenStack open source project and say, hey guys, by the way, you screwed up, we got to do over. You have to go in there and say, look, this is not quite good. So what we should do is let's tweak a little bit here, let's tweak a little bit there, keep as many concepts in place as possible, and hopefully together we're going to shift in a better direction as we move along. This is also important because we have to realize that there are major deployments out there. And so you cannot fork too much. The more you fork, the more resistance you're going to get from organizations to actually adopt such a thing, right? Because then you lose the support of the community. So one of the typical things that we see out there is that, why should we do this? OpenStack supports IPv6 right out of the box. Like I said, similar to everything else, this is, one of those claims that is, has to be very, very well qualified. Frankly, you would see claimed support for IPv6 quite a few releases back. All the way to Grizzly, the idea was that we are supporting IPv6 in OpenStack. But it was nowhere near. Even with the latest releases like Juno and even Kilo, right? True support, complete support of IPv6 for production, it's not there. I would suggest that if you believe that it's supported out of the box, I would suggest, turn it on in production, turn your pager on, and then we can talk. There are still challenges that we are facing in making things work, even with the latest releases. There are significant bugs that have not been addressed because, again, it's a prioritization game. It's an understanding game as well. That's one of the biggest challenges that we have seen with the OpenStack community. They do not understand v6, and they are not in a great rush to understand it either, which is a bigger problem. And then you miss a lot of the things that you need in order to take this support or any type of implementation, take it through the whole process, from development through testing and into production, and then operationalizing it, right? So metering and reporting and so on. To give you some examples, we had a proof of concept, over a year ago. We had a deployment about 6 months ago. But only now we had a chance to actually spend time on building more components that allow us to operationalize all this IPv6 enablement of OpenStack. So we had to develop things related to testing. Of course, since you're not familiar with OpenStack, you do not understand maybe some of the references there. In OpenStack, in the community, you have Tempest, which is used to test features, right? So you have scripts that test features and functionality for OpenStack. There's no v6 test cases or test scripts there, right? So we had to build those. Raleigh, it's a tool that is used in order to do some scale testing. Nothing there either. And it's a painful tool to develop anyway. But a lot of gaps, right? There is a lot of work that has to be done. It was great that we had this little project in our shed and made it work a few months back. But when you go to production, you have to fill in a lot of additional gaps.
What's it all written in?
Python. So, by the way, just as a side note, if any of you guys here want to stay competitive, learn Python. Hands down. Not only that it's the language for infrastructure, but it's also one of the languages, yes, thank you. One of the languages for big data, okay? So Python and R, so yeah, put it down, go to Coursera or whatever your MOOC of choice is and get cracking on it. All right, so let's look a little bit of the roadmap. We started in Grizzly. That was the first time that we patched OpenStack for IPv6. We released all that information to the community. It's a free paper. It's on our webpage. You can go read it. We did a few more tweaks for Havana, released it for Havana. And then with Icehouse, we started to get a little bit more serious because we had an opportunity to work with a very large cloud infrastructure, with a very large customer. And so there, we started to not only patch your standard release of open source, but we patched also Red Hat's package, right? So RHEL 7 based OSP 5. We started to work on the unit tests, scale tests, performance tests, and like everything else, you have to remember, is not just feature. You have to test feature for IPv6, see what you screwed up in v4 by fixing that or taking care of that, and see how the two work together, impact the performance, in scale, and so on. In Havana, we actually, one of the things that we did there, I mentioned this in last year, we covered that a little bit more extensively, but we were the first ones to deploy an IPv6 only OpenStack. It was deployed in Germany, actually at the University of Luxembourg, but we served the election results for European Union for users in Germany who had IPv6 access. So in Germany, if you had IPv6 access, if you had IPv4, you go to the typical route to the hosting provider. If you came in via v6, you would come on our IPv6 only OpenStack infrastructure. We did that at the University of Luxembourg with a great team there at the University of Luxembourg. And about 5% of the traffic, of the overall traffic, was our IPv6. We did a lot of testing, we did a lot of a lot of skill testing and so on, and everything went great. We had no hiccups. And then now we built all our patching for Icehouse to be ported into Juno and Kilo, again with a very clear mindset that we need to make it easy to upgrade from one release to the other, right? With everything that we change, that upgrade should not be impacted or complicated. Our customer is going to deploy and is going to go to production next month, which we are very excited about. And the saga continues, right? Because, like I said, we fixed it, we tested it, and built all the scripts to test it. And now we're focusing on metering. We also hardened it for security, which was a big thing. You know, it's one of those things, one of those great things, right? Is if you're an engineer, you go, you build this pretty thing, you take it to operations, and operations starts to go through the list. Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? And then you have to go back and fix it, right? So we did a lot of work on security hardening, and now we're going to move into metering, reporting, and so on, right? So think about the full life cycle, like everything else. So in this case, in this deployment, like I said, it's a large cloud provider. The fix was done on Red Hat release. Their driver, they had a very clear customer request. That customer request needed IPv6 support to deliver services from their virtual private cloud. And in this case, we took a provider model where basically the VMs get provisioned by the infrastructure. So addressing is not delivered from OpenStack, but is delivered from the infrastructure through Slack. Okay, so it's a combination of Slack and stateless DSCP. Think in these terms. In OpenStack, generically what happens, since not many folks here understand or are familiar with OpenStack, what happens is you basically, when you want to build up a compute resource, you have to have a lot of information about how you want to build that instance, what type of provisioning you want to apply to that instance, right? What type of policies you want to apply to that instance, and you want to make sure that all this information is synchronized across all those projects, right? So network knows what you did, compute knows, nobody knows what you did, so that any type of policy is not killing traffic or it's fault is isolating your compute resources, right? So there is a lot of interaction there and a lot of state that has to be maintained in order to make sure that all these pieces that you brought together are going to deliver what you need. In the case of v4, it was pretty straightforward, right? Because it was kind of one way to do provisioning, right? Parameter on the HCP. But in the case of v6, we had to introduce two new parameters. And by the way, these went into the IPv6 blueprints. We have an IPv6 subcommittee in Neutron. But there are two, generically you can think in terms of two parameters. One parameter tells OpenStack how it should deal with provisioning this VM. And then the other parameter tells the VM how itself should be provisioned. Okay? So in this case, in the deployment scenario that I was mentioning, basically what we say is, create this VM, you OpenStack, create this VM for me, but make sure that this VM is going to provision itself by listening to router advertisements that come from a router on the infrastructure. So you don't have to, OpenStack, you don't have to worry too much about giving an address to this VM. But the problem is that this VM is going to get a v6 address from the infrastructure, but now your IP tables or forwarding policies have to be updated so that allows that traffic to go through, right? So on one hand, you allow the router to talk to this new guy that you created, but whatever address he got, he's able to talk back and get out, right? So there's a lot of orchestration that has to happen between Nova, maybe at neutron level, okay? And so we had to deal with that. We had to be able to facilitate this mode of provisioning compared to your typical stateful DHCP provisioning. We had to do a review of security threats. So once you enable v6, you have a whole new set of threats that you have to take into consideration. We had to review that and tighten that again in the policies. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, we had to work a little bit more on testing all these changes that we have made. So some of the lessons that we have learned, the bottom line is, and by the way, this is not a hidden thing. It is not a secret. It is just one of those things that people sometimes ignore to their own peril. The idea is that the community gives you sort of like a reference architecture. You know, take this, it's almost okay, but you're gonna have to do some work in order to make it work for your environment, okay? So expect that you're gonna have, when you deploy it, you're gonna have to do some additional work in order to fit it into your strategy, into your vision. You know, once you try to operationalize such a deployment, there is a lot of things that you have to deal with. So you can always do an academic exercise. You can do an academic exercise where you take your, I don't know, let's talk IPv6 security. You can take Scott's book. You can look at the latest things that came in terms of first hop security. Make your list of threats, and then start to lock things down based on that. But that's good. That's mandatory. But then when you take the operations, then you're going to have to start to understand what other pet peeves and scares those guys have, because they have an experience of their own. And they are willing to tweak things on their side only so much. And to be honest with you, even the security tightening that you do in OpenStack and that we did in OpenStack, you can do that only so much without having to impact other aspects of the project, right? So the idea is in the end, what you end up doing is you end up enforcing those policies, but through different tools. Sometimes a little bit of code, sometimes a little bit of policy, process, depends on the environment. We all talk about DevOps, right? I mean, how many of us have heard DevOps lately, right? Right, exactly, everybody. So we talk about IT as a services organization. We talk about this transition to this new beautiful world of IT where everybody is automated and working together. We talk about DevOps a lot. You have to think in these terms, right? I mean, you really have to start thinking the full cycle. You have to think about all the stages. And you have to think about all those stages, again, in the context of a comprehensive strategy for the organization, which includes OpenStack or cloud, which includes IPv6, probably SDN, NFV, and so on. Oh, before I close on this slide, the bolded statement at the bottom, that's my firm belief. Don't take it off the shelf and think that you're good to go. I think I'll skip over the slide, just jump to the conclusions. We talked about those things a little bit earlier. So, IPv6 has been sort of the poor cousin of our networking world for such a long time. I mean, there are a few folks here in this room that have a lot of bruises and wounds from fighting this fight for a very long time. We cannot, I mean, regardless of how much people are going to try, we cannot ignore it. And we cannot ignore it any further. OpenStack is a very good example in my view. In my view, with OpenStack, we build legacy from day one. And it's shocking to see that happen. Because even in the case of Neutron, you do have highly experienced organizations that are participating in the project, right? People that have organizations and companies that have done v6 for a very long time. And they are supporters of v6. But it's about messaging. It's about tying everything together. Of course, with OpenStack, we have the other problem that a lot of the folks that developed it, they don't have operational experience, so they don't look at that aspect as well, and that shows. But again, we need to avoid building legacy. We need to start thinking comprehensively, and that means IPv6 based, not IPv6 ready, IPv6 based. IPv6 will change your perspective on cloud, and vice versa. And I'm not talking just about OpenStack, in general. And every single company is going to have a cloud strategy. No doubt about it. I mean, you can look at it in different ways. You can call it however you want, but it's going to have a cloud element in their IT strategy. So, again, marrying the two is going to make a big difference in making each successful and the overall sum being more than 1 + 1. We've been talking about this for many, many, many years. The only way we get things moving, either for a public cloud or for a private cloud, the only way we get products and services ready is by pushing our providers, whether they're cloud providers or vendors or services companies and so on. We need to make this sort of like the first thing that you ask. The first thing that somebody walks into a room, that's the first thing that you're going to ask, just to take it out of the, off the table. I was in a conversation with a customer, their provider. Customer was asking of IPv6. Provider, their director of strategy is in the meeting and says, well, there's only so much money that you can invest, right? We didn't invest in IPv6 because, we didn't think it's important. Which is a very, very rational and valid answer. I fully support it and I fully agree with it. Because that's true. We have limited resources and we have to prioritize accordingly. But then do not come into a meeting and say, oh, but I still want your business. Okay, you made a choice not to do v6. Great. Take your little package, walk away, and think harder. Don't try to have the cake and eat it too. Everybody claims v6 support in all kinds, in all places. Sometimes it's fashionable, sometimes it's required. Like somebody famous said, trust but verify. And verify thoroughly and verify specifically for what your organization needs. Not just some generic requirements. Don't forget DevOps, right? I mean, I know we all have our own history, we all have our own lessons and so on, but the more you think in terms of DevOps, the more of these issues, of the things that you purchase, you're gonna discover. So, I have this last slide that was added at Ed's recommendation. And I'll take your questions.
Couple questions, Chip. First, can you provide us a list of the other IPv6 capable cloud providers? I went through the same thing and spent 3 months testing 40 different providers that claimed IPv6, and only 3 which you had listed were functional.
Yeah. Okay, so it is a good question. It is a question that is dear to my heart. We did an exercise, and this exercise was actually done about 2 years ago. We sat down, we built a set of tests that should be done to in order for us to claim v6 support or to accept that the cloud provider truly provides v6 support. And out of the Gartner's Magic Quadrants, we ended up, I think, with about 3. Now, this list since has changed. And I was talking with Mark Townsley, actually, about redoing this exercise, maybe with a few interns, right? We just didn't have the resources to redo the exercise. We had a lot of other stuff to work on. I have my own list, but they're very small. I mean, there are guys that are really tiny because, like I said, these guys are hungry. And we went after those guys primarily because our agents need v6 support, right? So I can give you that list off, offline, but is not by any means comprehensive. But we are considering actually doing a new analysis, and maybe that's something that we can sync up on.
Second question. With these open source developers, I'm finding exactly the same thing, is that they continue coding legacy features into all their products. Do you have a list that you've created to help these developers understand what not to do based on your current experience with this deployment?
Again, Joe, it's a great suggestion. Absolutely. What I would like, it would be a great thing to do. And actually, why don't we take this as an action item? Maybe we can get a bunch of us, and put something like this together. I think it's a brilliant idea. We are a tiny company, right? We are like that guy that I was bashing earlier. Right? I cannot do so many things, but it's a great idea, and I'll be happy to help. But it may be something that we can do, and we can maybe push as a community, right? So it becomes something that it's valuable to. Yeah.
So this isn't to put you on the spot or embarrass you or anything.
Yeah,
but
please do.
to kind of make a point. You say, that people who decide not to invest in v6, that's a decision and a priority and whatever, but don't come into the conference room and expect you to still hand them their business. And yet, a lot of your infrastructure is still on AWS. Why haven't you kicked them out of the conference room?
So
you can't get the vendors to move unless they start losing business.
Yes. So, I need to walk the walk on that statement. We do walk the walk in other statements, like we put our money where our mouth was with respect to enabling OpenStack. Because, by the way, there are quite a few guys out there who talk about how great of a job they did enabling IPv6, and I'm still waiting to see their walk, but it's a different story. Look, it is coming down to resources again. So for a small startup that tries to kick off a new product, AWS is pretty good. I started in Rackspace. I'm not sure if I know I'm trying to put vendors on the spot here, but okay, well, so be it. But I started there, and I had challenges, right? And so if you try to operationalize something new and quick, that was an easy thing to do. But like I said in my presentation, in my slide earlier, what we are doing now, we are at the point where we feel much more comfortable about operationalizing things on our own. And so if this requirement of native v6 access is not there, then now we are in a much better position to make that decision, to take that decision of moving. In fact, just as a side note on that, I know an organization, a pretty successful mobile app, who hesitated to do the transition to Amazon because of lack of v6 support and the 60% traffic for mobile application, because that's most of their users, obviously.
So, Chip, where do you define the success criteria for v6 adoption in OpenStack? Underlay in the provider side network, overlay in the capability to support tenants for v6 workspace, both? What do you, it seems to me the obvious is that a tenant workload space needs to be able to operate in v6. I think the provider is able to gain better agility by having the underlay being v6. Where do you think a better starting point is? Where are they at today in terms of capabilities on both? And what challenges exist there are different challenges in both spaces. What challenges do seem to exist in both of them for V6 adoption?
Yeah. So I'm totally agreeing with you in the sense that I believe you can look at the problem in those two segments, right? And I believe that the top segment is the one that is going to get attention first, right? Because that's where the money is, right? You have a clear customer comes, asks you for it. You want to be ready to offer that service. Yeah. And on top of that, I think at that level, you might get away with a little bit of a smoke and mirror, right? However, as you start to scale up, you're going to start to see the value of you being truly IPv6 ready and operating in that context. I would say that if you are a greenfield, there should be no question about it. It's going to be painful in the beginning, but I think it shouldn't be no question about it. You should try to go all in on V6. Now, as far as challenges are concerned, I think some of the challenges are going to come for now until we get to larger scales. I think the first set of challenges are going to come around monitoring, metering, reporting. Those are in my view going to be tough because they are already tough in V4, right? All right.